All right, we are on air. It is Thursday, December 11th, and we are getting really close to our release date, which is super exciting. This is a status meeting for Backdrop CMS. Backdrop is a content management system that is specifically geared towards the nonprofit, small to medium-sized business, and companies or organizations that are specifically concerned about ongoing costs in terms of maintaining comprehensive systems like content management systems. So we have a couple of goals in working on Backdrop. Backdrop is a fork of Drupal, and we are trying to create a system that is comparable in features to that of Drupal 8, but that is comparable in architecture to that of Drupal 7. So we're trying to build a full-featured site on a simple, lightweight underlying code base. We know that Drupal 7 is already too complicated, so we're also trying to decrease the complexity for in Backdrop as well. We're going to be fixing bugs, so bugs that were in Drupal 7, bugs that were in Drupal 8, bugs that we've introduced on our own. We're going to be fixing all of those along the way, as well as simplifying existing systems. So because Drupal 7 is too hard, we want to remove abstraction where we can. We want to simplify complexity. We want to make it easier to understand and more intuitive for the average developer. And where possible, we're also going to be adding new features. So we know that even with a simpler code base, we have a lot of possibility to add new things to make it even better than Drupal 7 is today. And so we're going to be adding new features along the way, not only now before we release, but also after we release, so that you have a continually growing, breathing, living system that will advance with technology, hopefully rapidly. And the big trick here is that some of these things we can do without changing APIs very much, like adding new features is allowed because that's new APIs. Simplifying systems is questionable, like some of that will be allowed because we want to keep it as compatible with Drupal 7 as possible, because we want to keep the upgrade path as easy as possible. And some of it we'll just have to postpone. We'll say, sorry, that's too much change for one version, and we'll push it off into the future. So in terms of future, our initial release is coming up very soon. We're going to do a Backdrop CMS pre-release on December 18th, which is a week from today. A week from today. So at that point, we will stamp the code, ready to ship, and we're hoping that we'll get a bunch of people to come and test it. So everyone will be all excited about going on winter break or on vacation where they don't actually have any work to do for a few days, and they'll install Backdrop and they'll give it a shot. And hopefully we'll get some feedback from all those people who are trying it and let us know if there's any significant we need to change. So that'll give us a couple of weeks to make a few tweaks here and there to the system to make sure that it's exactly what people want. And then our official release will be on January 15th, 2015, so 1/15/15, or 15/1/15, depending on where you are in the world or how you do your months. But yeah, we will be releasing on January 15th. And so it's really soon, so that means the things that we're working on now are all non-release blockers, but they're stuff that we'd really like to get into the first release. And then we will, of course, be able to make iterative changes going forward. We'll still be able to fix bugs, we'll still be able to add new features, but we won't be able to change any of the existing APIs. So we do have a change that is going to be require a change to the way APIs work. There's got to be backwards compatibility in there so that everything will continue to work from this point forward within reason. We might just postpone it. So in terms of the progress of the project, we have 3 major new things that we were working on to get into Backdrop 1.0.0. Those are configuration management, getting blocks and layouts in, and views and core. And all 3 of those things are in a completed non-release blocker state. So we have some follow-up issues for each one. None of those are release blockers. All of the major issues are completed and they're in as they are, which is fabulous. Things that are still working on, we've got a set of issues that we would like to do for config management in the future, but those are probably going to be in Backdrop 2, but there are a bunch of issues that Nate opened that we can review to try and figure out, they're hard problems to solve. Drupal 8 solved them one way, maybe we want to solve them differently in Backdrop, so we can examine and figure out the right way to deal with those issues for Backdrop 2. For blocks and layouts, the underlying APIs are in, the system is done, everything is working, the interface is a total mess. We know that, but it works. That's the most important thing, and it's actually even already better than panels. So even though it's confusing, it's better than panels was. It provides the same functionality that panels provided, and we have the ability to change that interface later. So we can do some user testing, we can do some designing, we can build some interfaces that work even better. And we have a chance, to examine our human interface guidelines, make sure we're using the right tools in the right places, and make that really slick in the coming months. But as it is now, it works perfectly well. So that's in and it's ready. And then the last thing is views. We have views, the underlying system in core. We've got a couple of little tiny changes that are going in. We have a couple of administrative listings and content listings that could be using views that also need to go in. These are also things that are not API breaks, and we can introduce them later. Of course, it would be nice if we had it all packaged up and ready to go when we released, but not as nice as having a released product. So we're going to go ahead and release as is with the stuff that we don't get done in the next month and a half here. I guess a month and a few days. But we are really close, and it's looking really good. So we've got a couple of issues for blocks and layouts, a couple of issues for views. If anyone wants to jump in on those and help us make it a little shinier on the outside, we could definitely use some help there. There's another set of things that we're working on that are fairly important to get done before we release.
Oh, hang on, Jen. Before you move out of that section, sorry, I could give an update on views and core stuff since there's been a lot of activity this.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so views and core, it's been in core for a really long time. It actually was one of the very first things that we got converted in Backdrop. But we've had it in core but not actually been utilizing it for a long time, and that's what we're basically working on now is replacing the administrative listings or any other listings that we previously had in core. We're converting those over to use views. We're not making those conversions release blockers because we can really convert them to views at any time because the old systems basically don't have any APIs associated with them or very limited APIs. So the views that we're working on right now that are making a lot of progress include the administrative content listing. So admin/content is looking really good, and there's a good pull request out there for it. And BW Panda has been doing a bunch of work converting a whole slew of other listings. Those other listings are looking good, but they don't have upgrade paths yet. So when you upgrade, if you have a block placed, for example, that lists like recent comments, that block should get converted to a view for you as part of the upgrade path. So that's a little bit of a tricky thing to accomplish, and we're working out making sure that we include those upgrade paths and not just including the built-out views for new installations. There's also a lot of discussion happening right now around performance because views, super flexible or super popular as it is, it's just not as performant as a hard-coded listing. So there's some discussion happening right now about what we want to do about that or what listings are considered, acceptable, the current performance on them. But I think that, with 80% of Drupal sites out there using views, there's not really an option to not use views, or even shipping Backdrop not using views is just the whole situation would be a little, yeah, it would be silly. Exactly. So what we're looking at right now is we're probably going to accept the performance regressions, at least as far as like administrative listings go, because the number of administrators are really low. Typically, I mean, the overall impact is pretty bad, like on the magnitude of like 75% slower, but 75% slower is still like, in half a second. So it's not like it's going to be crippling, it's just going to be slightly slower than what it was previously, but still probably below a perceptible, time difference for a human. So what we're going to do probably is move forward with converting those listings and at the same time start going through and trying to optimize views itself. And we found a couple of issues already this week that get us, like one of them is like a 10% faster and one of them is like an 8% faster. So we're already moving views into making it more efficient. And I think that's really, that's about our only option really is put these conversions in, like knowingly look at the performance difference between them and then work towards optimizing it at least for the out-of-box views. So and it's all still really exciting. The conversions are totally worth it. There's some new functionality that gets added as well. Like we now have a search, for example. The administrative listings before didn't have a search, which is kind of ridiculous. And of course, it's customizable, and Fuse bulk operations works and is in core, and we get rid of these old crufty APIs. We used to have two systems, actually three systems, for performing bulk operations. Like comments had one, and nodes had one, and users had one. And now they're all just going to be bound up in using the action system. So, I mean, there's a lot of great things that are happening. But there's slight downsides as well. But we're working on mitigating that as much as possible. So anyway, that's the Views and Core update. Things are going really nicely. It'll be great to get some of these views actually in use in Backdrop out of the box on new and upgraded installations, rather than just sitting there like ready for people to use.
Yay. All right. Did you want to throw in an update about CMI or blocks and layouts too?
No, there's nothing really new on those guys. Like blocks and layouts, it's been in a shippable state for a month or two now. CMI, the big news, like 2 weeks ago, we finished all of the conversions for CMI, so that literally everything is all in CMI. Oh, we deprecated system settings form this past week, so that got moved into Drupal.inc. So it only exists if you have the compatibility mode turned on. There's a lot of discussion going on right now around if we can make a replacement for that. System settings form was used as like the shortcut to say, I've got a configuration form, just shove every single value exactly as it is in the form into the variables table. But there's kind of, I don't know, it's been convenient, but it's pretty magical. And what we did in Backdrop was we stopped using that, and we just manually coded submit handlers for every settings form in Backdrop. That has some disadvantages, that it's a little bit more code, but it has advantages that it's more clear where a configuration is getting saved. It's less magic. You also have the opportunity to like clean up your values before you save them. Like if you want to cast them as booleans or integers, that happens now instead of saving everything as a string, which it often shouldn't be. So I don't know. There's a lot of good reasons why we got rid of it and didn't make a replacement, but there's some consideration around, should we make a replacement for system settings form? And right now,
like a Backdrop config save or something that would just take that form and write some random config file and shove everything in it blindly, just like the old system did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what's under consideration. Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't like. I feel like. Even though doing it the right way is more work, it would be nice to have a shortcut that would just do it the fast way too, and then let people decide like whether they want to do it one way or the other.
Yeah, right now we don't have a shortcut, and I mean we could add a shortcut at any time. So I think I'm fine with just accepting with what we've got right now, which will kind of, set the precedent that people will have to write a submit handler for their settings forms now. But if it turns out to be like, we get a large group of people who are saying they really want that convenience, then maybe we can add it later. Because it would be an API addition, so we could add it in a minor release if we needed to.
Is there a way that we can add it in a way that's compatible with system settings form? Or is that like deliberately we want people to know it's different?
Yeah, we should leave system settings form exactly how it is for compatibility. So if you've got a Drupal module and you port it to Backdrop, system settings form actually continues to work and continues to save into variables. It's just that the entire system is deprecated. Like variable set, variable get is deprecated, and system settings form is deprecated, but they all still work. So, okay. So it should stay as it is and continue to save into the variables table, because that's what that function does.
Okay. All right. So that is the status of our 3 major new features: config, management, blocks and layouts, and views. We also have a couple of other things that we need to work on before we can release Backdrop 1.0.0. The one major thing that I think is actually a release blocker at this point is figuring out our security issues. We have 2 unresolved security issues for Backdrop. We just need to figure out how to get a patch from one of them and apply it to Backdrop, so that one should be pretty simple. So looking at the solution that was used in Drupal and adapting that for Backdrop. The other one is a little bit more complicated, is the issue that added the token to the end of automatically generated image styles in Drupal 7, and the way that a lot of contrib modules work, when that patch was introduced, the contrib was broken because it depended on that not being there, and then when you added it, it didn't work anymore. And so we initially objected to the solution that Drupal had adopted on the principle that we shouldn't be breaking all of contrib for a security issue that maybe isn't that much of a big deal. And so we were evaluating other solutions that might also solve the problem, that wouldn't break contrib. In that way, we would solve the not a big deal security issue, but also not break contrib. And there are a couple of ideas in there that I don't think anyone has really decided are the absolute best way to go. So if we have anyone who's specifically interested in security, understands the scope of the problem, and can offer some insight on which solutions are good, how big of an issue it actually is, all of that kind of stuff, we can try and figure out what our path forward should be for that less security issue. And then other stuff that we're working on that are not necessarily release blockers, but I think are important. You're getting cross-ports from Drupal 7.33 into Backdrop. So this is just mostly bug fixes and user interface improvements and documentation updates that are good changes. If we're behind Drupal 7, it might look a little funny because we're supposed to be ahead of Drupal 7. So it'd be good to make sure that we got all the same fixes that Drupal 7 has also in Backdrop. I'm working on a different issue today, in which I'll talk about a little bit later, but maybe when I'm done with that I can work on these two, because they're usually pretty fast to hammer out some of these cross-ports. So I'd like to work on that too. We have a couple of lists of Drupal 8 backports. These are at this point not very crucial for us. There's like a handful of like 3 HTML5 issues. I think one of them has a pull request that just needs some work. One of them, let's take a look at which ones they are. One of them I think is just clean up on how we add attributes to the one of the template files, and one of them is trying to get multiple files into file upload using the multiple HTML5 ability. So where's the third one? I thought maybe the third one got merged in already.
No, it's not the bottom-ish. It's
number element for views. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the 3 that are left. All of those are fairly straightforward. You just need someone to work on them. It would be nice to get them in, but if they aren't in right away, that's fine. Some of these are API changes and then wouldn't get in.
Yeah, I've already tagged the multiple upload one as a 1.1 issue.
Okay.
It's not actually. It wouldn't need to be an API change, but it would be an API addition. So. And that problem is really gnarly. I don't think it's something that we'll be able to do before release. Okay,
that's fine. Should we maybe remove it from this meta? Because it has a separate issue anyway.
Yeah, maybe what we should, I think we should go ahead and close the meta anyway, because everything, like the remaining items inside of the meta, like are tagged for different times now. So I think we are kind of done with the meta. There's only 2 items left, or 3 items left.
I'd like to finish this maintenance page, template 1, before we close the meta.
Okay.
But the other one I think the other 2 I think are fine. Okay. So 1 issue left in the meta that we need to work on, and the other 2 we can just postpone until whenever we get to them. And then the other set of meta, I think we should close this JavaScript meta. So we had basically a list that had, let's update all of our JavaScript so that it adheres to coding standards. And then there was a bunch of work that was done in Drupal 8 to just update the JavaScript. And we took a lot of those patches and they just applied and it went just fine. But there's a whole bunch left. I don't think it's super critical. I think it would be nice if our JavaScript was nice and clean so when we got people who are, mucking around in our JavaScript, it would be easier for them to work on it. But it's definitely not mission critical. It's not a Drupal 8 really, or it's not as important to us as it was for Drupal 8. So I think we should just close the JavaScript meta issue.
Yeah, the remainder of the ones that are in the JavaScript issue are doing things like, making things that previously were a JavaScript file into a library with the JavaScript file inside of it, and using pound attached in a bunch of places, and getting rid of Drupal add.js. But none of those things are a requirement for Backdrop, because we still have the implied dependency on jQuery, so you don't need to register as a library. And we also kept Drupal add.js, add CSS, add library around. So a lot of these things don't really apply to us. Like, maybe it would be nice in some situations to have it, but in no places is it actually a requirement for us.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and remove that from the agenda so we don't talk about it every week, since we're not worried about those issues, and we can update the meta and close it out if we need to also.
Okay.
Okay. And then other things that we're working on, these are also not release blockers, but that we are thinking about for Backdrop, are the design-related tasks, including a little cleanup on the administration theme, cleanup on the installer, stuff like that, that I think is, again, not a release blocker. A lot of it we can do after the initial release of Backdrop. Theme system cleanup, so we've got a couple of major issues that we specifically postponed, a couple of major issues that we're working really hard to get in, and then the rest of it will probably have to wait until Backdrop 2. We've already done a bunch of work on consolidation and other stuff. We're removing the process layer, which is the issue that I'm working on today, which I'm super excited about to make things a little less confusing. And then we've got another minor thing we're working on, user experience improvements. A lot of these can also be done after the initial release, things like adding a rich text editor and establishing our human interface guidelines. So those are not dependent on being in before we're established before 1.0.0. So also things we're working on, but not super urgent. And then we have a couple of issues where if we have someone who's an expert in CSS or HTML, we could use just an overall review. Nate and I have obviously been looking at this stuff a lot, but it would be good to have a new set of eyes on it to say, like, hey, is this the markup you want for layouts? Or is this the way our CSS is formatted? Is it correct? It would be good to just kind of have a high-level review of those things if someone wants to jump in on that. Obviously, if we don't get those reviewed before release, we're going to release anyway, but it might have some yuckiness in it. We've got too many divs or too many selectors in a given CSS file or something. So yeah, it would be good to have a review if people are interested in that. Let's see. We have a section in this weekly meeting to announce updates from the PMC. We don't really have any updates this week. Last week when we had this meeting, we announced that we had established a mission statement, which I think is super important for us, which is good. We're also working on some new content for our primary website, and we'll try and get that up soon also. That helps kind of say what is Backdrop and why should you care about it, which I think is useful. Other things that I think are really important that we should just iterate again, pre-release is coming out next week, December 18th. Actual release of Backdrop CMS is coming out January 15th. So tell your friends, tell your family, let your dog know, all that good stuff. It's coming soon. Other things that we're working on that aren't necessarily Backdrop the product, but are important for Backdrop the community, are the primary website, the API site, the GitHub service, the update server. We've got a lot of stuff going on that is peripheral to the actual project itself that all needs a bunch of work, and it's all been kind of postponed because we want to get the product out. So I think as soon as Backdrop 1.0.0 is released, what we should all do is kind of take a nice deep breath and then refocus on some of the stuff around the product itself, because if people are going to be using Backdrop, they're going to need a place to go to find modules. We have to build that place. We have to build those modules. And we've got to kind of help establish the community around the software as well. So things we're working on are the API site. We've got a bunch of change records going on there. We've got a bunch of people doing review of the change records that are there, trying to make sure we've got code samples from before and after. I think that's a really great place to start. We're going to be working on putting a nice theme on it. We're going to work on, in addition to the API side itself, we're also going to be working on setting up an update server so that your Backdrop site will be able to tell you if it's up to date or not. Short term, it's just going to be something that, returns a message, and it's like, I'm a server, it won't be useful. But longer term, we want that server to actually house some really useful data for us. We know with Drupal.org, not only does your Drupal site, ping Drupal and the Drupal update server and tell you if your site's up to date, but the Drupal update server tracks some statistics on what your site is actually doing. It would be really great if our update server could track some statistics too, and in addition to the stuff that Drupal tracks, we also want to track things like which modules are currently being used on your site, like which core modules, and that'll give us some really useful information for in the future. If we decide to remove modules from core, we'll know, if 80% of people are using that module, we obviously shouldn't remove from core. So we've got some big plans for that, but of course, haven't been working on it since we've been working on Backdrop itself. We're also interested in setting up a GitHub service. This is a tool that allows people who create contributed modules for Backdrop to register them on GitHub as being a project for Backdrop. And then Backdrop's flagship website can check with GitHub and say, hey, how many contributed modules are there? Aggregate them, build a search. Just let people find stuff that might be posted on GitHub in a way that is more intuitive than just trying to search Google or trying to search GitHub to find the project you're looking for. So getting that set up is also super important, but obviously not as important as getting Backdrop out. So we'll regroup a little bit and work on that after Backdrop's out. And then, of course, getting our flagship website up is probably the most important thing. We need to tell the world that we have a release. As soon as we have a release, we need to tell people why they should care about it, why they should use it. Today you've got a choice of choosing Drupal 7, Drupal 8, or Backdrop. We've got to fight a good fight for getting people to use Backdrop. Obviously, our major selling point over Drupal 8 is it's here today. But we've got some really good selling points over Drupal 7 too. We want to list those. I think we've got a pretty good pitch going. We've just sent some content off to our designer. We're going to figure out how to get it all laid out and presented in a way that's pretty as well. And so that I think we need to get done. We need to build the pages that allow people to find the modules and themes that are on GitHub. We need to set up a showcase site so people who have built Backdrop sites can post them on our website and maybe write a little story about how Backdrop worked for them, that sort of thing. We want to put a listing of people who are building sites in Backdrop on the site, so if someone comes to our site and wants a Backdrop site, they can find someone to build it for them. I think that would be super useful. And we've got a whole bunch of plans for other stuff we can do with that site in the future based on things that have worked for the Drupal community or things that haven't worked for the Drupal community. We can kind of learn from their mistakes as well as their successes and do the same thing in Backdrop. So we've got a lot of work to do. It's not Backdrop the product, and we should get started on that here in the next month or so as Backdrop gets done. Today, after this meeting, we'll be working virtually together on GitHub, on IRC. If you have any questions, you can tweet at us. You can jump in IRC channel and ask us directly. We're usually in there. If you need to get Nate or my attention, it's a good idea to type our name first, because sometimes we're heads down in code working on pull requests or whatever. We might not notice conversation going on. But we usually are in there, and hopefully you can find a way to get our attention. And then at some point in the future, we'll establish some more in-person sprints. We had a couple of really great ones this year, and we're hoping to recreate those situations next year. So, is there anything else, Nate, you want to add to this week's discussion that we haven't talked about yet? Are you?
No, I don't think so. I think we're pretty good.
Okay. And then I know, Alberto, you're here too. I don't know if you have any questions you'd like to bring up for us or not. If you don't have voice capability, you're welcome to type them into the chat too if you wanted to add them there. Or if anyone else is watching the video and has any questions for us, you can tweet at us at Backdrop CMS. Usually gets our attention. It'll notify both Nate and myself, so if you have any questions, you can ask us there. Or you can jump in IRC. We're in there not just on Thursdays, we're usually in there all the time. So it's a good way to ask questions to us directly as well. All right, well, I can't think of anything else that we should talk about today or anything else that we should add to the agenda. for every week. But we will be meeting again next week on December 18th, which is a very exciting date for us because it's release date. We'll be issuing our pre-release next week, and we'll be starting to build sites with Backdrop, which is really great. All right. Well, thank you for joining, and thank everyone for watching later. And yeah, till next week.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Whiny dog. Bye.